of a chairperson is to try and stop somebody in the middle of their discourse. But I want you to know, Mr. Saul, that in the anxiety of speed and precision, we have not forgotten the heroic struggle of your people as they resist, and most importantly, as they inspire the rest of us. And the lessons of the people of El Salvador will go down in history So please convey to your people that we here at least are asking you to continue the struggle. The next speaker is somebody that I will not attempt to introduce, only to give you an anecdote. In Algeria, some time ago, I met with and discussed some problems with SWAPO people who had come up from Namibia, and in the contingent were about 6 women. One of the women was shot during the struggle, and she had come and recovered there, and we had finished our seminar, and I was going back the next morning, coming back here, and about 12 o'clock at least, she said, by the way, I want you to do me a favor. For some reasons, she was quite convinced that I was a Jamaican, and then said, you know, I would like you to take a message. And the message is to a very dear friend of mine from the 6 of us women here. I want you to send a message to Michael Manley. I said, sure, I'll be glad to. And you know, one of the things he did for us is that he invited us to his country and taught us how to type, file, and do all kinds of important things that we'll have to go back to do. And I just wanted him to know that, you see, even in his office, in the Prime Minister's office, he has to try and restructure and reorganize his office internally. And if ever Namibia becomes independent, we'll be glad to come and help him. This was 12 o'clock. I couldn't have the heart to tell her that Michael Manley was no longer the Prime Minister. And so I said, yes, my dear, I will deliver it to the Prime Minister. But that indicates to me what he represents. Michael Manley dared to look horizontally instead of being dependent vertically. So that we are grateful to him, if nothing else, to force the Caribbean to look horizontally and free itself from vertical dependence. Mr. Michael Manley.
Brother Chairman, Mrs. Vera Rubin, other distinguished participants, and my brothers and sisters, I began my participation in this conference with something of a shock. I entered the room as my friend Archie Singham was speaking. In fact, he was in full flight. But that, of course, was not the occasion of my shock. He was in the middle of his dissertation on the nature of war and the relationship between war and the Caribbean. And I actually heard him saying, my advice to all Caribbean political figures, return home and study war. I had just entered the room at that moment. Apart from the fact that I realized immediately that I was misplaced. Let me hasten to assure you, Archie, that I actually took the plane this morning, and I am returning on the first flight tomorrow morning. And I will take the rest of your comments to heart. The second comment that I would like to be permitted, if I may, is to endorse Ricky Singh's suggestion of George Lamming as a chairman of Caribbean People. I'm happy to see George here. I see George shaking his head. But I do say in all sincerity that I think it's an interesting idea, and I can think of no better choice, though I'm sure George will not thank me for that endorsement. My last comment is perhaps the serious one, or the most serious one. I was very struck with the clarity of J. Mandel's comment, analysis, criticism. I would not presume to either speak for or confess on behalf of anybody in Grenada or in Guyana. But I do not hesitate to say that we, in our part of the Jamaican political process, even if we have not expressed the criticism as harshly, are very conscious of a substantial merit in the criticism that he advances. And in fact, listening to him, I wondered if I should perhaps tear up the notes that I have and speak only to the question, what have we, or what do we think we have learned from the experience of what we attempted? And perhaps I can find a way, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, to weave a type of rejoinder into my comments. Mark, I'm not sure how exhausted you all are. I would imagine that you're in a state of advanced exhaustion. And your mere presence here is not only a great courtesy, but an extraordinary act of stamina. And I will try to respect your condition. In thinking of the theme of this conference, I'm very glad that there have been such a number of distinguished scholars, because it is really in the province of scholarship to rest prophecy on analysis. And I, who am merely a working political activist, really could not trespass into the 21st century. I think I have enough problem wondering what to do with 1984. But on the assumption that you have been thoroughly briefed on the perspectives that are relevant for and the prospects which you can accept for the 21st century, I would like, if I may, more to speak at a very practical level, out of our own political experience, of the question, granted that we do get to something called the 21st century, with what should we occupy ourselves between now and then. I begin naturally with all of the obvious comments. One is very conscious that, speaking of the Caribbean region, that you are speaking of some 50 million people, which is a potentially viable aggregation of souls, but divided into no less than 30 countries and nation states, therein lying one of our problems. I therefore have no difficulty whatsoever, have always felt profoundly that it is impossible to conceive of ultimate viability in the Caribbean outside of the context of regional integration. that I take for granted. One is interested in the fact that our region played such a profound part in the past, in the whole of that process that led to the capital accumulation that was a foundation of the Industrial Revolution. And it's very interesting, in a sense perhaps ironic, that the Caribbean region, which contributed so much to European economic development 2-3 centuries ago, should now once again be on the world stage, but in a different context, a strikingly different context. Because when we look at the region, I think that we can isolate perhaps 3 things that are immediately significant and each profoundly problematic. The first is that perhaps more than any other part of the world, the Caribbean is now the heart of that foreign exchange crisis that besets and bedevils the third world. Secondly, we are interesting in that we show a certain political creativity in the search for new political and economic forms, strategies, answers, if you will, each of which itself becomes an immediate flashpoint of international pressure, controversy, and action. And thirdly, of course, we are, I suppose, as much as any part of the world, illustrative of the problem of small countries trying to exercise sovereignty in the presence of an aggressive and pervasive hegemony. So if we look at those things as, in a sense, providing the indicators of our situation, let us see if we can proceed very quickly from the dominant realities, which are obvious, to responses that are taking place, and then to what I really would like to talk about, which is the political problem, the political response that is possible. I do so reminding you that we cannot all operate on the assumption that we work in our particular country in what I might call a framework of revolutionary simplicity. Most of us operate as political activists in extremely complex political environments that have flowed from complex political and social history. Nor can we base our tactics on assumptions, however justified, however idealistically desirable, of significant change in the international environment. Therefore, we face this reality that in looking at the problem of development in the region, we have to take account of enormous political complexity. It is a reality with which we must deal, and we have to take into account a given international environment which is predominantly hostile to our interests and our possibilities. In fact, it was Lucille Mayer who spoke very eloquently